Hey folks, this is David from the Coachful Coaching Leadership Podcast. I have a quick favor to ask you before we get started. If you haven't subscribed or followed on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the podcast platform of your choice, please do so. I would love your feedback. In every show note, in every episode, there is a link to rate this podcast. So it's ratethispodcast.com/coachful coaching. I want to make content that's good for you and better for all of us. All right, on to the show now. All right, folks, welcome back to the Coachful Coaching Leadership Podcast. I'm David, and today I'm here with Belinda Clemmensen. Belinda, how are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I am excellent. So, Belinda, how about you give an intro to yourself to everyone out there?
Yeah, thanks, David. So, Belinda Clemmensen, I am the founder of an organization called the Women's Leadership Intensive. And our mission is to inspire, empower, support, and equip women to lead the change the world needs. I'm also the author of a book just out this year called Women, Leadership, and Saving the World: Why Everything Gets Better When Women Lead. So obviously, we do a lot of work in terms of women's leadership and gender equity, diversity, equity, inclusion.
Okay. Um, Before we started recording, when I talked to you before this podcast, I said I was going to do some homework. So this is me turning in half my homework. Okay, Belinda. I have
Excellent.
some, little bookmarks here. This is painter's tape. Like I had no bookmarks. My daughter was like, "Daddy, what are you doing?" And she gave me a nice bookmark, by the way. She folded this nice thing. She's like, "Daddy, just use this." So she felt sorry for me. My kids know when Daddy's reading, it's serious.
Great. I'm so glad you got it and started reading it.
Yeah. Well, let's get started and just understand. You mentioned off camera too. Like there's we're not there yet in terms of gender equity. There's paths to get there, and it's on all of us to help us get there. So with that, I do want to look at. I asked you a question. Is there anything you've changed your mind about lately, and anything you've doubled down on? You want to talk a little bit about that first?
Yeah, I found it's interesting because those might sound like easy questions on the surface, but I really gave it some thought. And so the thing that I've been trying to shift, the mindset that I've been trying to shift, is really an old pattern that I think I've been working on most of my adult life. And I, like many people, kind of grew up in a time when worry was just part of the day to day, right? In my family, there was worries about money, there was worries about what was coming next, there was worries about was everybody safe. And I think that a lot of that kind of got downloaded into me as well. So it's paradoxical because on the one hand, I am the uber optimist, and then on the other hand, I have this sort of default position where it's almost like this anticipatory dread or worry or what's going to happen. And so I'm really working on letting go of that mindset and just trying to
Mm.
stay um, in as least an equal amount of what is the positive potential in any given situation as what are all the things that could go wrong that I need to worry about and stay vigilant about.
Mm. Yeah,
So,
yeah. You're also a coach, right? Like an
yes.
executive coach. And so a lot of what you talk about there is how you as a coach try to direct coachees towards is what else is possible? What are the possibilities? It's interesting. I find out in my coaching journey, I have to coach myself exactly how I would coach a client.
100%. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
physician heal thyself stuff, right? Like as coaches, we need to be doing that very same work on ourselves. Otherwise, we're really not being authentic with our coachees.
Yeah. Or what my parents like to call it back in the day is do as I say, not as I do. So speaking of old school mentality. Um, Crazy or true fact about Belinda? Can you share something?
Well, yeah. So I think this story speaks to who I am at my core in a lot of ways, in that I tend to push back against systems and feel like there's always got to be a better way to do things. And so when I was in university, probably around third year, I had an analytical chemistry class, and I did not like the professor. I don't think I had the language at the time to say, he was misogynistic, he was patriarchal, he was condescending. I think at that point in my life, I would have just said, I don't like him. or it
Mhm.
doesn't work for me. Looking back, I can find that language. So, what I decided to do was I didn't want to spend time in his space. I didn't want to spend time in his class. And so I took my analytical chemistry textbook and I figured I can teach myself this. And I broke it down into all the lessons and I did the math to figure out like what do I need to get on the midterm and the final to pass this course, even if I never show up for a quiz and I never show up for a seminar, can I still pass? And I figured out yes, I can based on the distribution of marks. So that's what I did. I just didn't go to class for the whole semester, whole term. I show up in the final exam, which back in that day, I don't know if this is still true the way they do it, but I went to University of Waterloo. We're in the gym and it is a
Mhm.
sea of tables, right? Like, and everybody's like sitting in the rows. And so I show up and I sign in with my student card and I go to my little spot and the professor's handing out the paper exams because they were paper back then, handing out the exams. And he shows up at my little table and he looks at me and looks at his list and he goes, "You're not in this class." And I said, "Yeah, yes, I am." I was so naive, right? "Yes, I am in this class." He's like, "Well, I've never seen you." And so I explained to him my decision to teach myself instead of come to class, and he was not happy. Double checked my student card several times. And so I merrily went on my way writing the exam, thinking, I think I nailed this. Like, I think I did a pretty good job. And then when I got my transcript at the end of the year, he gave me a 49 as my final
Mm.
mark. And I was devastated because I'd never failed a class in my life. And I was kind of happy with this experience of like finding my own way and, changing the system. And I got kind of put right back into my place, right? And
Mhm.
by this prof. I don't know if I actually deserve that 49 or not. I never challenged it. Again, hindsight being 2020, if it happened to me today, I would challenge it for
Mhm.
sure. But
Mhm.
back then, I was whatever, 20 years old. I didn't have that confidence to
Hmm.
really keep pushing the system.
It's interesting you talk about the word challenging, and so just I'm going to refer to the book right now, Women Leadership and Saving the World. In the show notes, folks, I'm going to have a link to this on Amazon, and you can purchase it there if you're interested. But in chapter 6, there was a section there. Equality begins at home. That's chapter 6. And you talked about, and again, for the benefit of the folks who are listening right now, page 87, you talk about having an identity crisis after high school where, be likable, don't challenge people. How did you navigate that?
Yeah,
Talk more about that.
yeah, I think that is still very real. I mean, I know it's very real for young women and girls in high school. My partner is a high school teacher, and he has many stories to share about where girls are these days. And there's a lot of things that haven't changed that much
Mm,
in decades. And so I think that especially for women who are younger and have less power in the world, they are valued for being compliant, for being nice and pleasant, for being attractive, for being sexually available, for not making waves, and that's what makes a good girl or a good woman.
mhm,
Now, right up alongside that, though, are injustices and inequalities and experiences of harassment or discrimination, or worse. And so I think what we have is this friction between a social expectation that persists to this day, that women get in line and stay there in many, many ways, right? And that our job is to support others and make others comfortable and safe and happy and keep the status quo running, right up against this sense of dissatisfaction, um, wondering if it's me or if it's the system, not exactly knowing how to express the inequalities that we're experiencing. And that is in part why I wrote this book, because of all the conversations that I've had with women over the years, young and old, there are some universal experiences or very common experiences. I don't want to say universal because
mhm,
obviously everyone's lives are different, but very common experiences that so many women have that they don't necessarily have language to describe,
mm,
or that they don't necessarily have language to push back and challenge. And so the book is very much giving voice, I think, to what a lot of women have been feeling or experiencing, and maybe not even noticing, but
Hmm.
certainly having trouble describing.
Yeah. Talk more about that. Like, I think at the beginning of your, I think it was the beginning of the book, you talk about like you started the Women's Leadership Intensive, and you actually threw it out there rhetorically. Why not call it Human Leadership Intensive? And I think that I asked this question. I think is very much related to what you're talking about, the unique experiences that
Yeah.
many women have. So, what do you say to that, folks who say, "Well, why not the Human Leadership Intensive?"
I would love to get to that point. That's the end game here, right? If we just get to a
Mhm.
point where we say leadership is not gendered anymore. And so we're talking about leadership, we can talk about human leadership intensive. Great, we all learn. The reality is we're not there yet. Leadership is still hugely gendered. We know this from the stats and the data, right? That women only have 10% of the Fortune 500 CEO seats, or there's only one woman on the TS 60 CEO list. Like the numbers, we can drill into any sort of piece of data and see that leadership is still gendered in terms of the stats, but it's also still really gendered in terms of the experience, right? So,
Mhm.
give just a quick example. One of the women that I was coaching was a member of an executive team, probably two or three women on the executive team out of the entire group of, let's say, about eight. And she was their VP legal. And she's in a meeting where she's advocating for some risk assessment to be done before the executive team proceeds with an initiative, which is her job. It's why she was hired. It's her
Mhm.
role, right? To
Yeah.
make sure that they're managing risk. And while she's advocating for this, her phone pops up with a text from another colleague in the room, male colleague, and the text says, "Be nice."
Mm.
And that's the kind of expectations or, very specifically gendered expectations that a lot of women are still feeling, even when they get to the table, right? Are they allowed to just fully do the job and be themselves, or do they still have to manage egos and be nice and take the notes, which I see happen all the time, even at executive levels, do the housekeeping jobs, so right now, Women's Leadership Intensive is really designed to close a gap and solve a very specific problem, which is we do not have equality and parity in leadership.
Mhm.
So we're trying to close that very specific gap. That being said, I'd love to get to a place where we don't have to worry about that gap anymore. Like that would be the goal.
Yeah. You I want to sit in the problem for a second, right? The problem that you're seeing, and in chapter 3 you talk about, chapter 3, it's on economics and bad decisions. You talk about there how the economy is not inclusive, and specifically you gave an example about childcare and society expectations. You know, and I think a lot of us know that the expectation is, well, the mom is going to take care of the child if they're sick, if the daycare calls, it's going to be the mom. But you talked about also the reverse problem where your husband, your partner, receives the calls. He runs to the daycare. He picks them up after school because he's a school teacher. He's right there, and he gets some ribbing because
Yeah,
of that. So I guess talk more about that. Like that's an interesting dynamic, and that by the way resonates with me. That's why I picked it out of the chapter because I work in a male dominated, white male dominated industry right now. Not good, but not bad. It just is.
yeah,
Um, and I had to bust out of there at 4 when my kids were young, and I'm like, I got to boogie. I got to catch a train. If I miss this train, I can't pick them up. And there's always that dude, pardon my language, is just going to say, "Oh, nice to be you." I go,
yeah,
"What do you mean?" They go, "Leaving so early." I go, "Do you know what I do after I drop off my kids? I cook dinner because my wife is still at work. I cook dinner, I clean them up, I put them down for bed, and then at 9 o'clock I crack this laptop open and I work until 2 a.m. in the morning. By the way, to help you, buddy, and then I
yeah.
walk away, right? And it's that culture still exists, by the way. Um,
Absolutely.
sorry, I took over the question there. Expectations, childcare. Mom always takes care of. Dad just works.
Well,
What?
And this is it, like, so the gender binary box that we've sort of,
Yeah.
like when you start to pull apart, like how many things in our society are gendered, it's kind of crazy, right? Like
Hmm.
everything from, the way cars are designed to the way medication is tested, like it's everywhere.
Crash test dummies. You talked about that, right?
Yeah, it's everywhere. So the gender binary box is a box for women for sure. And we've been historically held less power and privilege than men have. So it's a very specific kind of box, but it's also a box for men. So whenever we start to disrupt that norm, that prescription of, women do this and men do that, whether it's women disrupting it or men disrupting it, we are going to get pushback and we are going to be policed for that, right? To get back in the box. So when you or when my partner as a man sets boundaries around family time and your role at home, um, you're challenging that sort of historical norm that a man's job was to go to work, earn the money, and somebody else was looking after those children, right? It wasn't you. So that is challenging to the status quo. It's going to feel threatening for people, and you're going to get the pushback, like the person pushed back on you. And a lot of that is straight up gaslighting, right? Must be
Mhm.
nice, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
On the other side of it, we also know that women tend to be more penalized when they're breaking out of that gender box.
Hmm.
And so for things like caregiving, women still do about 2.5 times more unpaid care work and domestic work. And of course, this varies family by family, right? Your relationship's different, mine's different, someone else is different.
Hmm.
But in general, globally, it's 2.5 times more unpaid caregiving work. And because we don't economically track or value that work, it's invisible from economic models. But the reality is, as you well know, because you've done it, it keeps the wheels on society, right? If
Hmm.
you weren't on that train at 4 o'clock, your kids don't get picked up and a whole set of dominoes falls down.
Hmm.
So, all of this caregiving work that has been completely missing from any of our economic models is, it's incredibly valuable. It's what keeps the world spinning.
Hmm.
There was some really interesting research just even done on breastfeeding, for example, and somebody calculated the number of hours of breastfeeding you would do in the first year of a child's life, and it adds up to be just shy of the hours of a full-time job, just for that one job, right, of breastfeeding.
Hmm.
And yet we call mat leave in this country, so grateful to have a year, whatever it is, 11 plus months of mat leave as part of our legal rights, but that is often referred to as a year off.
Hmm.
And again, it's this perception we have that that work's not valuable or
Yeah.
it's not work. It's not even work.
Yeah. Well, it's so, and for those listening in the U.S., Belinda's referring to the policies in Canada, which I think are excellent. It's much more European in that way, where it's,
Yeah.
hey, maybe the child needs the mom and dad a little bit longer than 3 weeks. And I remember early in my career, uh, working in tech, there were moms who would come back after 6 weeks in the U.S. And I don't know. I don't know how you do it. I honestly
There.
cannot imagine that. And even now, my opinion is that, like, at least my company is, they've been very progressive. Like, I have to give my company a lot of props. 6 months of paid uh, uh, family leave, right, or maternity paternity leave.
Yeah.
It's excellent by U.S. standards. I don't think it's still enough. Uh, Personally, like, I saw what my wife went through with our two kids. I personally, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how you do it in 6 months, but people do it. Nevertheless.
And then
But
the
yeah,
next phases are then what do we do with those kids once parents do go back to work, right? Like that's where we
yeah,
come in with, are we properly funding universal childcare access? Are we paying the people who do that work appropriately? And the answer is no, we're not. So there's a whole series there of
yeah.
ways that we value feminized or caregiving kinds of work.
Well, that's the reality of my coworkers. Like, this one guy, he had three children, all very, very rapid fire, and his wife made the sacrifice because she wasn't in a high paying job, and they did the math. Childcare would way surpass any salary both of them would make, and so his wife made that sacrifice at the time. This is like more than a decade ago, to actually stay home and take care of the children. Right? I think she went back to the workforce after, but it's there's it seems like the system is setting folks up to fail as well, Belinda.
Yes,
Right?
absolutely. And I mean, we saw this at scale during COVID, right? So when schools and daycares shut down and lots of families had to make that decision, like who is going to downshift or completely pause career in
Mm.
order to look after kids and online school and all the different things that were happening. It was predominantly women who did that for a number of reasons. One, the social expectation that that would be, more aligned with what a woman would do, but also, as you were saying in this situation of your colleague or friend, because we still have a persistent gender pay gap, women are in lower paying jobs.
Mhm.
That's aggregate, right? Of course, we have some women who are earning more than their male partners in those kinds of mixed gender relationships. However, the data would suggest that, yeah, I mean, those things line up. Overall, women are, lower on the pay scale. And so when we have to make decisions about whose career gets paused or downshifted, economically, it's women's.
Mm. Okay, there's a lot to unpack here, Belinda, and I acknowledge that. But in this podcast, I do want to. Hopefully, we set up sort of like the problem for everyone, and everyone could agree there isn't gender parity. Hopefully, we can agree on that. Let's move towards the path to get there. And I think you said this very carefully. We're not there. We probably won't get there. Hopefully, within our lifetime. I hope my daughter will experience some greatness there. But paths to get there. Do you want to talk a little bit about how we move towards gender parity or equality?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few really important paths that stand out for me. One is we need to all do this work together. People of all genders need to work towards gender equality and gender equity. Because if we leave it on, if we say like women need to solve this problem, then we're going to be fighting a seriously uphill battle because we already, as we've discussed in the problems side of this conversation, right? If we don't have the power, we don't have the money, and we don't have the credibility, and we don't have the ears listening to us, it's really hard to make change. And so it really does take allies and men to sort of step into feminism, and fight for equality and equity for all genders. So that's one pathway forward. Is this is really not about us versus them, men versus women. I live in a house full of men. I love them all. It's not. I'm not. The definition of feminism is just, believing that all genders are equal and should have equal opportunity. And if
Mm-hmm.
you believe that, then it's on all of us to advocate for it and stand up for it. So that's one pathway forward, is to kind of mobilize all of us
Mm-hmm.
together in allyship, to sort of make these bigger changes.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing that really stands out for me is that, in the early days of women going into the workforce and taking on leadership roles, what they had to do to survive was to emulate men, right? And we see this even in the early clothing that women wore into the workplace, right? Suits and ties, was what women showed up. They wore men's uniforms, essentially, right, to show up in men's spaces. And
Mm-hmm.
they behaved like men, and they had to be sort of like as hard ass as their male colleagues and all of those things in order to survive and be taken seriously. That was the early days. What I think now is that we're at a point where we're realizing that what the promise of diversity is if we bring people in who are able to be themselves, as opposed to just bringing in people who look different but behave the same as the old model.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where I think women in leadership can be a key lever of change, because if we can create spaces where women feel included to lead as themselves, bringing their own values, their life experiences, their different perspectives, right? And not just try to have them assimilate and be the same, then we can get to some really interesting new decisions being made.
Mm-hmm.
And that is true in I think in women in leadership, but in diversity and leadership across the board, right? If we can imagine a table of decision makers at every level who are very diverse, coming together, bringing all those different perspectives and different agendas to the table, having conversations about it, and arriving at conclusions and decisions that benefit everyone.
How do you define diversity?
I think diversity is just the fact of all of us being different. I think we're talking about diversity a lot more now, but I don't think diversity is anything new. Um, I think diversity is just a fact. Inclusion is a choice, and equity is an outcome.
Hmm. Sounds like there's a delivery.
Let me put on my headset and see if that helps.
It's okay. We'll pause here.
All right, is that better?
Are you on your headset now? Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
yeah,
Okay.
got that.
Okay.
You
It's
still hear
fine.
him?
I still hear, but you know what? Let's just carry on. This is this is raw. This is real,
Yeah,
right? This is
very
how it's
real.
supposed to be.
Yep.
Yeah. So I do want to talk about like diversity because when I'm a leader. I've hired a lot of people in in my organization, and one of the things we're taught is unconscious bias.
Yeah,
So there's the conscious bias. I knew
yeah,
a
there
person
is.
who said, I want to hire people from, I won't name the school, but who have done an MBA at school X. And it was like, what's your logic? Oh, they produce the best business people. I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, okay. And so that was an interesting conversation. But then there's unconscious bias that a lot of us have, right? Where I think naturally, as a human being, maybe a survival mechanism, you'll look for people who are similar to you, who share, who look like you, who act like you, who think like you. So, you know, how's that play in to the solution
Yeah,
or the path towards gender equity?
it's a great question. I mean, I think this sort of affiliation bias that you're talking about, where it's easy for us to hang out with people who are like us, is prevalent everywhere, right? And that's not even dependent on your gender, your race, your sexual
Hmm.
orientation, any of those things. Like we tend to affiliate with people who are similar. It's easy.
Hmm.
And I don't think there's necessarily that in itself is problematic. It's when we start to then create these divides between us, our group, and other groups, that it becomes these social categorizations that we then sort of hierarchically set up, who has more of this and less of that. But what takes more effort, I think, is to intentionally surround ourselves with people who are different. And
That's
I think
uncomfortable for a lot of folks,
it is. And so that's
myself included, by the way.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm uncomfortable with it sometimes. Like, ooh, I don't know if I'll get along with that person.
Yeah.
Will I be successful with them? So I guess, yeah. And sorry, I interrupted you, Belinda.
Well, I
But
was just going to say, I mean, being able to walk into that discomfort, like it's almost like we have to set ourselves an intention to get out of that comfort zone in order
mm,
to spend time in those more diverse places, because that's where we're going to learn, it's where we're going to grow, it's where we're going to be challenged, it's where we're going to start to understand inclusion and belonging.
mm. Have you advised organizations and who are hiring and how they might be how they can open up the aperture to be more diverse? And
Absolutely.
what do you advise them? How do you advise them? What do you tell them?
Well, I tend to stick with the gender equity piece when I'm doing my consulting work with organizations, just because that's where the bulk of my background is. And we obviously partner with lots of other experts in diversity, equity, inclusion across the board. But from the gender equity side, in terms of the things that we're advising organizations, I think a lot of organizations are starting to invest in their women employees and leaders differently now, right? In their development and their engagement, in making sure they're creating stronger pipelines for women, all the way up to the top. So I do think that's one of the things that we talk about, and it's certainly that's sort of our core program that we offer at the Women's Leadership Intensive, is a year-long leadership development program for women to help them on that career path, right? To make real progress on that path. But if we only focus on supporting the development of women, and they're still going back into a system that is not friendly or inclusive to women, then the chances are you're not going to be able to retain those women in the long term.
Mm,
So I always advise organizations, you need to both look at how do we engage and develop the women that we have and create a really strong pipeline and community of women that are also sponsoring, mentoring, and coaching each other. And What do you need to look at in terms of the systems, structures, and culture of your organization that might need to change? So, here's a really sort of stark example of this. One of the industries that we do a lot of work in is mining, which is a very male dominated industry and is
Hmm.
unique in a lot of ways because it's also, they have a lot of remote operations. So, in the old days, it was only men who worked in those remote operations. They would fly in, fly out, or possibly drive in, drive out, depending on the geography. They might be on site for 14 days and then they're out for 14 days, or some kind of a cycle like that in a 24/7 operation. Now enter women, right, into the mining operations world. And um, things like parental leaves, right? So, what do we do with women who are flying in and flying out of a remote operation if they're pregnant and we don't have
Mm.
a doctor on site? Do we have a plan in place for how we're going to support the health of those women when they're on site? Because the healthcare that happens in the operations is very specific to whatever's happening on site.
Hmm.
What happens to their careers when they're on a parental leave? Because again, in the olden days, the system was just set up for men who didn't take parental leaves back then.
Hmm.
So now we're having to re-look at how do we set up this whole system. If we want women to work in the operation, what do we have to change about the operation itself so that they can be there?
So mining, um, it doesn't get more male dominated than that.
Construction is it's the
Construction.
only industry. So yeah, it goes construction and then mining and then on up
Yeah.
from there in terms of gender equity. Yeah.
So how open are these organizations to changing?
Depends on the company. And really it depends on the leadership of the company as well, right? Because it's who is making those big high level policy decisions, right? Do they understand the benefits of having, so you could look at this example of, parental leaves and pregnancies in mining operations as a problem, right? As a deficit. But then if you look at the research about the benefits that women have brought to that industry so far, it's things like they've improved safety. In some organizations are reporting like a 67% increase in safety, which is
Mm.
one of the number one metrics that mining looks at.
Yep.
Improved culture, right? Which, if you want to attract the next generation of talent, you need to have a strong, positive, inclusive culture. Or even adherence to productivity schedules goes up when you bring women into the operations. So you need to have somebody making decisions who understands the pros and cons of change.
Hmm. Yeah, that is very fascinating. Because as you're talking about that change, and if you're having, let's say you do have leadership that believes in it, they sponsor it, they, and they start pushing it forward. A lot of organizations, I'm not familiar with mining and construction, they turn over their executive teams every 3 to 5 years, maybe even less, depending on what's going on. Um, so again, talking about the system might be working against you here. If you're
Yeah.
turning over your executive team that sponsor these things every few years, how does that work against what you're trying to achieve here? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it can be a big problem. And beyond that, too, I think we're also starting to see pushback now on DEI initiatives from certain
Hmm.
places, right? We certainly see this a lot more in the US, but I think it's happening here in Canada, too, where people are pushing back against the work that it takes to actually do the systems change to create more inclusive cultures. Like, it was one thing when we could look at it and say, well, we'll do a few workshops or we'll do an International Women's Day event. Check, right? Check off the
Hmm.
box. But when you dig deeper and say, no, like, no, we actually really need to like re-examine our policies or um, do some work on our culture,
Hmm.
or re-examine our, even things like flexible work. I mean, great example right now with this. Do we get people back into the office mandatory X number of days a week? Are we letting people be self-determining in the hours that they're working? Pros and cons of all that. That's an interesting dilemma as well in terms of, are we going to reinforce the old structures
Hmm.
or are we going to get creative and invent new structures?
Yeah. I my opinion there is that I hope that many organizations don't let this opportunity pass. One of
Yeah.
the largest work from home experiments happened 3 years ago, and it happened for about a year and a half to 2 years. It was unexpected, but it was an experiment. And what did it show? I Some industries it absolutely accelerated. Some industries, obviously you have to be in person. Like if you're doing customer service, hospitality, you have to be there. Like obviously. But then, you hear these organizations saying, well, especially in the financial industry, saying, hey, yeah, you're coming back or you can quit. Well, guess what? A lot of these financial organizations are actually bleeding people right now
I'm not
because their
surprised.
competitors, they're smaller competitors, fintech competitors, like places that pay a lot and are cool and fun to work for. They're saying, yeah, you can work from anywhere. And they're bleeding a lot of great talent to those organizations.
And honestly, rightly so, because, I do think in addition to the experiment that happened around work from home, there was also a real experiment around, um, unexpected experiment around what do I actually value in my life?
Hmm.
And I think there was a long stretch of time there where capitalism has been king and it was all about work harder, harder, harder. And we know this, right? The number of hours that people work has just been steadily increasing and increasing. You said it yourself. You'd be home and you'd be on your laptop from 12 until 2, or whatever those things are. The expectations for worker productivity has just gone up and up and up, as have shareholder returns.
Hmm.
Great for some people, the 1%, the 10%, not so great for a lot of people.
Hmm.
And I think that's another thing we can't take our eye off is for what and for who are we
Hmm.
working so hard?
Hmm. So changing systems, having that change sponsored, making it sustainable in terms of that systems change from leadership. I do want to touch on allies at home. In your book, you talk about how you weren't expecting to get married. In fact, you didn't even think about it, and then you met this guy on a paddle for the cure
Yeah.
trip. So you want to talk a little bit about that? How you met your partner, and
Yeah.
how your mindset changed there.
Yeah. So I met Shane, I think I was probably 30-ish when I met Shane, my partner. And yeah, I mean, I had lots of relationships up until then, and I never felt that I was in a relationship that would be sustainable for me because I always felt a little boxed into a gender role. And I think a
Mm.
lot of people in heterosexual relationships feel that way, like that there's still this thing of like, well, the man takes out the garbage and the woman does the dishes or diapers the baby or whatever. Like, I think a lot of that's still happening. It was certainly happening back when I was in my 30s. And so I kind of resigned myself. Like, I'm happy to have relationships, but I'm not I'm not putting myself into that kind of heteronormative situation. It's just not going to work for me.
Mhm.
And then I met Shane, and it took us a while. Like, it was not sort of a romance movie, love at first sight kind of situation. We had to like figure things out of who
I
we
mean, you had to put
were.
work into it, Belinda.
We sure did.
Oh, okay. I thought it just happens.
No, didn't just happen. Um, so yeah, it wasn't sort of the typical romance story, that's for sure. But
Uh,
what was so different about my relationship with Shane from any of my other relationships is he never tried to limit me. He never tried to make me be someone that I wasn't.
mhm.
And certainly I was doing things that, a lot of, in a lot of relationships wouldn't have been okay with a lot of people. So, like, you mentioned Paddle to a Cure. It was a sea kayaking trip. It was a fundraiser for breast cancer. So I would basically go sea kayaking with a bunch of women for the whole summer. Like, I'm gone. Bye.
Mhm.
And so, in a lot of relationships, people would be like, well, what about me? You've left me behind. And Shane was just like, yeah, go. How can I help? I'll meet you in a certain place and we'll check in. Or, so there was no, I didn't feel like he was limiting my potential to do anything that I wanted to do or be
Mm.
anyone that I wanted to be.
Mm.
And he is a huge feminist and an amazing ally. And so, I mean, the fact that he is a high school teacher gives me so much hope for the future because he never walks out of this house without wearing a t-shirt that has something slogan on it about equality, feminism,
Mm.
inclusion, belonging. And he walks out the door with that like a banner on his body and he goes to the high school,
Yeah.
you know? So yeah, we need the allies at home. We really do. I mean, it's like I said, it's a partnership between all genders at the high level, but that partnership has to also happen in our households.
Hmm. So another aspect of it, and speaking of systems change, the home systems.
Yeah.
So I guess like this is a this is probably even harder, right? How do you change that? How do you change some of those norms and expectations in the home?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple things. You have to, a lot of that labor is still invisible. So, it's the stuff that it's the caregiving work that's never been counted. It's the domestic labor that's never been counted. And so I always recommend that people do an audit. Like, what are all the jobs that get done in a house? And these are the physical jobs, like I'm picking up the garbage or whatever, but they're also the mental jobs. Am I remembering that it's somebody's birthday and I need to give them a call? Am I remembering that, the person who's coming to dinner on Sunday doesn't eat dairy? Like, there's all this mental labor that goes on every day
Yeah.
in households.
Yeah.
And so, first thing to do is kind of make that visible, like make the master list. And Eve Rodsky wrote a book called Fair Play, and she's got some great tools that kind of give you the list. If you don't want to like go through the work of making the list, a list exists. So you can just use hers. So make the list and then do a bit of an audit, like who's doing what
Hmm.
as it stands right now, and does it feel equal?
Hmm.
And if it doesn't feel equal, what needs to change?
Yeah.
And the other thing, so a lot of women too don't even recognize how much they're doing. So these audits are great because if they're just doing things automatically and they start to actually itemize all the things, then it's much easier for them to say, hey, my worth in this family is not connected to the fact that I'm doing 600 things a day. I can
Hmm.
let some of that stuff go. And we
Yeah.
can let it go to our partners, we can let it go to our children, we can outsource it if we have the resources to do so.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just starting to shift that up so that, you know, if women are going to lead change in the world, we need to have energy. We need to get a good night's
Mm.
sleep. We need to have mental bandwidth.
Yeah. What you're talking about there reminds me of someone I was coaching the other day, and she said she went away on a trip with a girls' trip. They went away for a few weeks, and when she got back, her husband and kids noticed the gap, and the gap was, she was saying her husband usually comes home and then from work and then does the rant. Oh, this is what happened. Oh my God, I can't believe this happened. And she would absorb it. She would listen. And so they had that great dynamic. And when she got back, he said, I didn't realize how much of my emotional burden I was putting on you. And vice versa. She said, I didn't realize how much emotional burden I was absorbing from my family. And they came to a conclusion pretty quickly, like, oh well, we need to give mom her space, right? And I
Yeah.
can't go to her with everything, and vice versa. She's realizing it, like, no, I actually I have to pull back too, and but being who she is, she's such a wonderful person. Of course, she's going to listen instead of
Yeah,
saying, actually, I need some time here. So I think that's a relationship that works where they both realize they need to help each other.
that's right. And they're both able to sort of set new boundaries or refresh the boundaries of what
Hmm.
works for them at the time, right? And that requires dialogue. I mean, I think that's the beautiful thing and the challenging thing about being in a long-term relationship is it's
Hmm.
constantly renewing and what felt right 5 years ago may not feel right today.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I find I don't think this is the full solution, but I feel like I have a responsibility as a parent to model for my kids. Mind you, I've done some bad bad behaviors that
We all do.
I'm not proud of as well, and as all of us have those things where we're like, oh, okay, do as I say, not as I do. But the one thing I appreciate, like my parents they're old now. Like my dad's in his mid 80s now and everything, but I think they're pretty progressive for for their times, right? My dad was the cook in the house. Like, mind you, he was a trained chef, and cook. Um, and my mom's just pretty much early on in their marriage decided, like, yeah, you could do that. And he'd go to a 3 a.m. shift, work until like noonish, right? Shift work, and then he'd come home, take a nap, cook, do what he got to do, get back to bed, start the 3 a.m. shift again, right? And but you see that, you observe that, and one of the things that it's funny to this day. I cook most of the time at home. My wife can cook wonderful food, by the way, but it's just I'm faster.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more creative with it. I'm very fast, so I just do it. But there's an assumption with our friends, like, oh, they'll say to my wife, like, "How's the cooking?" And you're cooking the food, and she's like, "Dave does it," and they're like,
Exactly.
"Really, Dave does it?" I was like, "Hell yeah, I'm
It's
pretty
so
good."
interesting. It's fascinating, right? Because you look at something like cooking, like, and when you're in your rational mind, you say, well, cooking's not gendered. Like any human being can cook
You
or not
should
cook.
know how to cook a steak or something. Good God,
But
right?
yet we've gendered it so much that somehow it's this assumption that it is something that women do. And I think that's the unraveling and unlearning that we need to start doing in and of ourselves, as well as like in society at large, right? Is to start to question some of those things. So when the gender assumption pops into our mind
Yeah,
unbidden, which of course it's going to, can we just look at it and say, does that make sense? Is that even real?
yeah, yeah, and to not feel guilty about it either way too,
Yeah,
because I have to say that made my other half for a second, like, oh, do you expect me to cook? I'm like, hell no. Like, I love cooking. And by the way, I have a son and daughter, and I teach my son, like, one of the first things. He's the older one. I go, son, you're gonna have to know how to cook a steak, a good old steak. And when he was old enough to not burn himself, first thing I did was, let me introduce you to the barbecue grill. And we
nice.
just we just went at it. And here's how you cook it. Here's how you do it on a skillet. Here's how you add the vegetables. Just simple meals, right?
Well, and
Um,
those are the kinds of things that like they almost feel they can feel small at the time, but I think it's a huge shift for the next generations, right? So as parents, as you said, our responsibility to role model that we're not just stuck in the gender roles that our parents or grandparents might have been in, right? So that we're offering them a wider range and that we're also teaching them more similar things, right? So if you have boys and girls in your household, can they both do laundry? Can they both cook? Do they both clean the
mm-hmm,
bathroom? Do they both change the oil in the car? Do they both,
mm-hmm.
do whatever? So it's like to de-gender some of those things in our households, I think is great role modeling.
Yeah, changing diapers, all that stuff. Like,
Yeah.
okay, we're at 47 minutes. So I do I told you we could hit a few hours if we wanted to, but I am conscious about talking about some of the other things you're doing, speaking about the path towards gender equity and equality. I know you're involved in some other things, like activator at SheEO.
Yeah.
You talk about like some of the other things you're doing outside of the Women's Leadership Intensive that you're doing to help, build this equality and equity.
Yeah. So the CEO, or it's now been rebranded as Coralus, is actually a response to the fact that venture capital is only available to women. I think to the tune of 3% of all
Mm,
venture capital only gets about 3% gets awarded to women. And a lot of women-owned businesses do not sort of meet the traditional criteria for being uh, qualifying for venture capital. And so organizations like Corliss or SheEO are sort of building their own system on the side,
mhm,
right? Very different, very community based, different financial models. And so I'm really interested in that because that is an example of um, innovation, really. And so we have all these systems that we rely on that we say this is just the way it is. But then if somebody builds something really different over here and it works, to me, that is hugely compelling because it's to say, hang on a second, is the way it is the way it has to be, or is it just what we know? So if we can break out of that mold and try some new things, I find that really exciting and creative. So that's sort of what I spend my time with when I'm not doing the work with the Women's Leadership Intensive or with the book
mm,
is is looking at alternate models. Like if we are going to build a new way forward, what might it look like? That to me is very exciting.
Mm. So if everything goes according to plan,
Which it won't, but okay, I'll imagine.
I'm pausing there for effect. And you know, my daughter, who's like 9 years old now, gets into the workforce, gets her first job. What would be different for her?
Ideal world. Um, she freely chooses what she wants to do, free from all gender expectations, including sort of those bigger social expectations of what she needs to look like, what she needs to wear, what she needs to weigh, what she needs to say, what she needs to do, right? She has freedom to choose. That's one thing. She gets paid equally. That would be nice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, she gets promoted equally and acknowledged and has the same sort of equally viable career path as anyone else. She gets heard. She feels like she can be herself when she shows up to work and she doesn't have to make nice or put on a
Mm-hmm.
mask.
Mm-hmm.
And she can challenge people when she disagrees.
I hope that happens.
I hope so too.
So, Belinda, last two questions, and I always end it the same way. Um, what's the advice to 20-year-old Belinda?
Oh, yeah. So this is, the world will always tell you to be a certain way because that's convenient for the world. It will tell you to fit the mold. It will tell you to go along. It will tell you to maintain the status quo. And if we're lucky at some point in our lives, we realize that doesn't really feel like who we are. It feels like we've been playing a part. And so we start to dismantle that, right? And try to figure out, well, who am I really? And so my advice to my 20-year-old self and to 20-year-old selves all over the place is um, start early, dismantle that stuff early, and really spend some time figuring out, who am I? What do I value? What do I think?
Mm, wonderful. All right, last question. I always give my guest the opportunity to ask me any question. So the last question is for you to ask me, Belinda.
Hmm. Yeah, I would say my question for you is, what is one thing that you can do in the industry that you're in, which you described as very male and very white? Like, what is one thing that you can do in your industry to be a catalyst for change?
I can tell you what I've been doing and what I'm proud of doing. Right. One of the things when I first took over this years ago, when I first became a leader, um, I built. There's still work to do, but I over almost 50% of my team was female. Right, and it had to be built to get there. Um, over over one third, over a third of the team was like of in the U.S. is like a URM, right? Uh, so I've done it, and I'm still doing it. Now it's hard. It's hard because especially if you're looking for people in a specific, how do I say? You're looking for someone, let's just say I want someone with 20 plus years doing X type of manufacturing, mining, with this type of experience. Chances are it's going to be a white male from, you know, middle of nowhere, Ontario, middle of nowhere, United States, right?
Yeah.
It's about opening up the aperture. And so, yes, you do need some of that expertise, right? That 20 plus year individual, um, you're going to need that guy, literally that guy in your team. But then opening up the aperture, and this is how I coach my leaders, is open up the aperture. We're going to need some folks who don't have that mold and bring other skills to this team, and they have been doing that, and hence that's why we've been hiring females as well. They don't come from the the proverbial mining industry, but they have parallel skills, right, that will benefit this team, right, or supplementary skills that will benefit this team. So someone said to me before, it's like it's building a the team of the X-Men, right?
Yeah,
Where, you don't want one person with claws and everyone with claws. One person has claws, the other one can move objects with their mind, and things like that. So you want a very diverse team in that way. So back to diversity, you got to build a diverse team in that way. So that's something I'm doing right now. I've done and I'm doing, and it has to be a very conscious effort that you're just not saying, I want this person from this school in this industry, because you're going to find a white dude from middle of,
yeah, exactly.
the whatever Ontario. So that's why I would advise people to open up your aperture, right?
Yeah, change these definitions that you have in your
Yeah,
mind of who you need and why.
yeah, yeah, and challenge yourself with that. So yeah, how do I do there, Belinda? I do
Excellent.
okay. Okay,
Excellent. I love it. I mean, that alone, right? If that message got out and people started doing that, it would make change. So
one
it's
step at a
good.
time.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
and but by the way, this is also because I was taught well by leaders before me. The leaders who came before me, the ones who hired me, they taught me well, and they were models, and that's why I'm doing the same thing. You see, it's good begets good.
Yeah.
So that's one part of my mission here too, is to teach the next generation some of the things I've learned. So, all right, Belinda, it's almost 1 hour. We're at 55 minutes ish. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you for a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
I did too. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now. Thank you.
There we go.